Welcome to Blake's Lake Creek Farm. My name is Lois Olund, and I'm here to share with you about my pandemic project. Here I am with my favorite farmhand, Zoe. I live with my husband, Joseph, in the beautiful foothills of the Oregon Coastal Range. That's Mary's Peak to the right in the background. It's a favorite place to hike in the spring to see wildflowers and in the winter to snowshoe. One of my many projects on the farm is hosting guests in my sheep herder wagon Airbnb. We have 4 of these refurbished wagons, and we get many visitors that stay on our farm. Some want a quiet place to rest, some want to visit the animals, and some enjoy a spinning or felting lesson if they're interested. The animals on the farm include Wensleydale sheep, a few rescue alpacas, and 2 guard llamas who were failed 4-H projects. I also raised some Angora rabbits for their fiber. The sheep are a very big part of my life and of the farm. Between shearing twice a year, lambing, and selling breeding stock, I sometimes have very little time to spin, which was the whole reason I started raising sheep over 40 years ago. In the spring and the fall, we host school field trips. Classrooms come in the spring to see baby animals, and in the fall we press cider with the students. Joseph, the fruit side of our partnership, raises over 100 types of heritage apples. He's a retired USDA fruit curator and was in charge of 2,000 types of pears. Also on the farm, we have 3 livestock guardian dogs to help protect the sheep. We're in an area that has occasional traffic of cougar, coyotes, bobcats, and sometimes bear. After losing sheep to cougars in the past, we invested in a few Maramas. It was a total game changer. No more predation. Another ongoing project to go along with the farm, raising our kids to adulthood, and teaching for 44 years has been producing roving for Bellwether Wool Company with my friend Linda Hansen. We started Bellwether in 1994, and while we continue to keep it small, we both enjoy processing wool and sharing it with our multitude of fiber friends. So, how did I decide to create the sheep breed study box? Well, COVID meant no fiber shows, no getting together with a spinning group of friends, no travel, no field trips to the farm, no teaching job. I retired, so I didn't have to teach via Zoom. No volunteering. No end in sight. Lots of angst. I needed a project. I decided to create a breed study of interesting fleeces. 50 total boxes of 50 different types of sheep. I do some research and share what I found out. I started ordering fleeces from interesting places. Sheep breeds I had only heard of, but wool I had never spun. The piles started to grow. The first fleeces I received were taken to Rogers Fiber Mill in Lebanon, Oregon, but the turnaround time was long, and as I ordered more fleeces, the processing bills became too high for my budget. At that point, I found some breeds I could order as prepared roving. I decided not to buy commercial top if I could find raw or simple roving, because the whole point of my study was to experiment with the wool as close to natural as I could find. Well, then I needed to store the fiber. I should have invested in plastic storage tubs. Since I wasn't able to hold workshops in my little classroom, it became my processing and wrapping space. As more fleeces came in, I had to develop a system for recording where each fleece was from, the breeder or the supplier, the sheep breed, the condition of the fleece, and in what state each fleece arrived: raw, coated, uncoated, dragged through the mud and briars, washed fleece, poorly processed, nicely processed, or rarely top, the only way I could find a few of the breeds. Here's an example of the fiber from one breed of sheep from two different suppliers. The top is sticky, poorly prepared, and the entire batch had to be re-washed and carded. The bottom roving was much better. Another example from the same mill is on the left. This particular mill was in England and had just begun processing wool. I gave them lots of feedback, both good and bad, about their product. At one point I asked them to just send me large bats instead of sending the fiber through their roving deck. In the beginning they knew so little about what spinners desired in roving that I was receiving lumpy, sticky balls of roving held together by paper clips. Yikes. All their roving had to be rewashed and hand-carted here on the farm. Most people, I suspect, would have stopped buying fiber from this mill, but it happened to be the mill who had some of the very rare breeds I was interested in, including in the project. I'm happy to report that their product is slowly evolving into a more acceptable roving. Here's another example of two different processed roving. The one on the left was a very thick and sticky roving that needed to be rinsed well and stripped into thinner pieces to weigh and wrap. The one on the right was better prepared, but contained VM that needed to be hand-picked out before it could be used. Washing fleeces and carding them into bats before stripping them into thinner, manageable roving, then weighing them into 1-ounce samples, wrapping and finally labeling them became my life for many months. Here are two typical 1-ounce samples before they're wrapped and labeled. See how much there is? And on the right, there are two different colors of the same breed. Once I added on to the original 50 breeds I had planned to do, I actually weighed, wrapped, and labeled over 7,000 samples. As COVID continued, I added many more interesting breeds, and storing the breeds as raw and then washed and then carded and wrapped became interesting. It took over my studio above the barn, and what you see is about a third of the total project, each breed stored in its own box of 50 samples. This is a picture of one of the finished breed study boxes ready to be sent off to a spinner. While all of this fiber ordering, package arriving from another world, fiber preparation, and packing was taking place, I was researching each breed, compiling notes, gathering pictures, and cataloging sources. You're looking at a 278 single-sided page of notes and pictures. I decided to use a template with pictures, breed history, sheep characteristics, fiber information, and sources of the information on one side of the page. On the other side of the page, I would write about the particular fleece I had processed, its source, pictures of the yarn made from the fiber, notes from my test spinners and felter friends, more about that later, and leave room for spinners to add their own notes. In the workbook, I included a few pages about the history of sheep in general and their domestication, as well as some handy informational charts and terminology. The final list included 131 breeds of sheep from around the world. I could easily have added at least 20 more breeds, but I ran out of space, and more importantly, money. I actually took out a large bank loan to finish the project. Here are a few of the breeds that I became very familiar with. On the left are Hebridean from the North Islands of Scotland. On the right are Swedish Fanul, also called Swedish Finewool. On the left is a Swaledale from northern England. I think their faces are so cute. On the right are, Talabont Welsh sheep from Wales. These are Beaumont, which is a type of merino sheep, very, very fine. and come from one of my suppliers' actual backyards. On the left are the cute little Castle Milk Morits. They're pretty tiny, from Scotland. And on the right are Dalesbred from, I think, the upper part of England. All right, let me talk a little bit about my wonderful test spinners. I asked 10 of my spinner friends with skills from beginner to very experienced to spin up small samples of these breeds and tell me what they thought of them and what they thought they could be used for. My spinners and one needle felter sent back notes and sometimes yarn samples of 10 or more fleece types, whatever they had time or interest in doing. The notes were then included in the workbook so you could compare to your own spinning or needle felting. Results may vary would be an understatement. One spinner, my dear friend Jane Herbst, was an overachiever. She decided she wanted to spin every one of the 131 breeds. And then she proceeded to weave this amazing tapestry from yarn of all 131 breeds, which she then entered in the Black Sheep Gathering Fiber Arts Show this year in 2022. And she won a trophy. Nice work, Jane. So, when I was ready to sell a few assembled breed study boxes, how was I going to display the product? I couldn't use a picture of the yarn because that's not what a spinner gets in the box. I could display the roving, but how does one display 131 breeds? Which is actually 140 1-ounce bundles because some of them have more than one color. I settled on just showing the full box. Now I'd like to spend just a little bit of time sharing information about a few of the breeds in the box. The first breed is my darling Wensleydales. Introduced into the U.S. in 1999 using imported semen, Wensleydales are an upgrade program originally using Lincoln, Cotswold, and English Leicester Foundation use. Now most of the Wensleydales in the U.S. are close to or at purebred status. There are only 55 members of the NAWSA raising these sheep in North America at this time. Most of these breeders have only a few Wensleydale sheep. I've raised sheep for 42 years and Wensleydales since the year 2000. I decided to raise Wensleydales after years of raising a few other breeds like Romneys and Lincolns. Wensleydales originate from the north of England that has a climate, namely rain, like Oregon. They have exceptionally hard feet, not prone to foot rot, which as a sheep breeder in Oregon is very appealing. You also shear them twice a year. The fleece grows about an inch a month, while many spinners want a fleece that is 10 to 12 inches long for tail or lock spinning. Mills don't usually accept any fiber over 6 to 8 inches because their machinery can't handle the length. The Wensleydale is a British breed of domestic sheep named for the Wensleydale region of North Yorkshire in the north of England. Wensleydales have a well-documented history and are one of the rare breeds able to trace their breed history back to a single distinctive sire. The breed was developed by crossing a now extinct local long-wool breed from the region of the River Tees in Wensleydale, North Yorkshire, with a specific Dishley Leicester ram named Bluecap. The first sire was born in 1839, and the Wensleydale Long-Wool Sheep Breeders Association was established in 1890. The North American Wensleydale Sheep Association, NAWSA, was started in 1999 and continues to function as an upgrade program, although using Wensleydales as terminal sires to improve other programs is also encouraged. Recognized as a rare breed, the Wensleydale continues to be found mainly in north of England, but there are some flocks in other parts of the UK and in the US. Wensleydale is Jane's favorite breed to spin, and she has the added benefit of personally knowing my sheep. The Norwegian Grey Trellender is a very rare breed of sheep that originated from crossbreeding native landrace sheep with the now extinct Tatra sheep in the late 19th century. In 1992, the Trellender was considered an extinct breed, but an extensive survey showed there were still several individuals of this species alive. In 1998, the Committee on Farm Animal Genetic Resources established a project for collecting and freezing semen from the Grey Trellender sheep rams in an effort to revive and perpetuate the breed. There are currently approximately 50 individual animals in existence, nearly all of which are in Norway, but that number is increasing. Although the Trellender is still considered in danger of extinction, there are a growing number of farmers interested in breeding and conserving this sheep. The Borare history was one I found particularly interesting. Originating on the island of Borare, one of the St. Kilda Islands off the coast of Scotland, the Borare sheep is the smallest and rarest of all of the UK's native sheep breeds. The sheep are descendants of the now extinct Scottish Tanface, with some infusion of Hebridean Blackface. Home to thousands of seabirds, the island of Borare, approximately 189 acres, has been called the Fortress due to its very steep banks. It's only accessible in a few places, in very calm seas, and then only by jumping onto rocks or by swimming. Instead, a very steep climb to the higher levels where there's grass and the feral Borare sheep. The inhabitants of St. Kilda led a very frugal existence, their diet consisting of seabirds and their eggs. They ate lamb or mutton, rarely, despite keeping flocks of soy sheep, the islanders' domestic breed. The feral Borare sheep were considered a reserve flock. From time to time, men from St. Kilda would visit Borare Island to collect birds' eggs or sheep wool, as well as the occasional sheep. The sheep that they chose to take back to St. Kilda were apparently thrown into the sea and picked up by other men awaiting in boats. The Borare wool was used to make tweed, and as a means of paying their rent to the owner of the islands called the laird, and to purchase additional provisions. I chose Fanul to tell you about because the history is a little bit startling, at least to me. The Swedish landraces probably originate from North European short-tailed sheep, and were the only sheep in Sweden until the early 16th century. Some had a soft wool undercoat and coarser overcoat that provided Swedish farmers with carpets, and vadmal, woven and felted fabric. Fine textiles couldn't be produced with wool from these sheep. Here's the disturbing part. King Gustav Vasa, 1563, ordered the importation of bump sheep, the fat-tailed sheep from Germany, Great Britain, and Spain for their fine wool. And for 300 years, Sweden imported these breeds. The aim of the government was to exterminate the harmful Swedish sheep. The attempts failed. The farmers needed the coarse wool for the textiles they produced. Late 1700s, Sweden began importing cheap wool and cotton for the spinning mills, and many of the imported breeds were removed and replaced with cows. During World War I, the demand for wool from the Swedish landrace sheep increased. The aim then became saving the landrace sheep, flocks of sheep located in remote parts of Sweden. Some of the discovered flocks had a fine wool with lots of shine. That may have been the result of crossing the landrace sheep with Spanish merino sheep in the 18th century. Sheep with fine wool were then crossed with the Finnish sheep. During World War II, the demand for meat increased, and landrace sheep started to disappear again. Then in the 1970s, the interest in Swedish landraces was renewed by craftswomen, and the Swedish Fenul Sheep Association was founded in 1980s. In 2013, Fenul sheep breeding ewes numbered 3,472. Statistics from 2019 indicate there were 2,115 breeding ewes in 161 flocks, but there are also uncounted sheep in flocks outside the association. Here's another one that I thought was kind of interesting. Hog Island sheep are a critically endangered breed according to the Livestock Conservancy. They are thought to be the descendants of merino sheep brought to an island off the eastern shore of Virginia by Spaniards in the 1600s. It's documented that there were many Hog Island sheep by the mid-1700s, the time of the American Revolution. The keeping of sheep from then until the latter part of the 20th century was a free-range model, with sheep grazing at will across the entire island. Over time, the island environment shaped these sheep into a breed that required little fresh water, had superior foraging abilities, and lambed easily. During the 1930s and 40s, several hurricanes made the island uninhabitable for humans, and they were forced to evacuate with whatever they could manage to transport. Approximately 18 sheep were left behind on the island. Decades later, the island was purchased by the Nature Conservancy, and the sheep, which now numbered around 100, were relocated to their new primary location, Colonial Williamsburg, Mount Vernon, and Gunston Hall Plantation in Virginia. The Hog Island sheep has become an important part of historical reenactments. Falkland wool was one that I had no idea about the history of the sheep. Falkland wool does not refer to a breed of sheep. It indicates wool that is grown in the Falkland Islands off the southeast coast of South America. The wool can consist of any of the breeds grown there, the majority of which are Polworth, Merino, and Corriedale. While wool production has been nearly constant over the past 150 years, the flocks were depleted considerably in 1982 during the Falklands War, when many were killed for food by Argentinian soldiers. After the war, flocks were supplemented by livestock donations from other countries, introducing a new population. Falkland wool is now grown on a network of family farms that pool their various wools, which is why the resulting product is not breed-specific. That means if you decide to make a project or a garment out of Falkland wool, you might want to buy enough for that project all at once, because you don't know what you're going to get the next time you order it. It might be one or another or a whole different wool. The Epent Hardy Speckled Fleece has proven to be one of the hardest fleeces for me to obtain. Traced back at least 200 years, the Epent Hardy Speckled sheep are a Welsh breed that has been bred to thrive in the Mynyd Epent uplands of Wales. I'm sure I'm slaughtering that pronunciation. At altitudes as much as 1,250 feet. In 1940, the War Department acquired the approximately 31,000 plateau acres from 57 farms for use as an artillery training area, and farmers are granted grazing licenses to graze specific areas of the plateau. Flocks make an important contribution to the firing range by keeping the pasture vegetation under control, which would otherwise be susceptible to burning. Another interesting thing about Epent, or Epent, is that they are hefted, which means I found that they are habituated to a specific area and don't wander off. So, you don't need fences. They are just free to range, and they actually come back home. Devon close wool fleece was also very hard to find. I found that even the suppliers in the UK didn't know the difference between Devon close wool and Devon coarse wool, which were quite different. The Devon Closewell breed arose around the mid-1800s when Exmoor horned sheep were crossed with Devon Longwells. They would be the coarse wool. The resulting intermediate-sized sheep proved very popular and expanded rapidly in numbers. By 1950, there were around 229,000 Closewells, almost all of them located in Devon, making them the most numerous breed in the county at that time. The Devon Closewell Sheep Breeders' Society was formed in 1923. A small flock is recorded as having been exported to Canada in 1947. The breed has also been exported to New Zealand. Although numbers of Devon Closewells aren't as low as some other breeds, the sheep are threatened due to their geographical concentration. Most of the breed is concentrated in Exmoor. In 2015, Rare Breed Survival Trust helped establish a new flock in Suffolk to help reduce this threat. I've grouped the two Tyroleans together because it looks like, from my research, that they have a lot of the same history, even though they might be on different sides of mountains. The Tyrolean mountain sheep of the Tyrol region of Austria and Italy is a cross of the original Steinshof sheep and the Bergamasca, which originated or occurred in the early 19th century and again after World War II. The direct descendant of the now extinct Zuppelshof, another slaughter effect, the original Steinshof developed characteristics well suited for life in the high mountains. In the beginning of the 20th century, purebred Steinshof still could be found tucked away in valleys of Tyrol, Austria, and Italy. But by 1964, less than 1,000 Steinshof were counted. In 1989 and 90, a few breeders decided to find the original type of the Steinshof to keep the breed going. In 2009, it was listed as endangered, and by 2014, the Conservation Organization of Germany listed the breed as extremely endangered and placed it on their red list of endangered animal breeds. The Tyrolean Bergschaft is one of the 42 local sheep breeds of limited distribution located mainly in Italy. The Tyrolean Steinshof is a cross between the original Steinshof and the Bergschaft. Here's another name I'm going to butcher for sure. This is a Swedish breed that's only found in one particular part of Sweden. It's called Härjedal, and it's a local breed that's a mix of several other breeds where the Norwegian sheep can be dominant in some samples. There are only 5 farms in Sweden that have them and very small flocks, so there's not any chance that they're going to be registered as a breed anytime soon. The only reason I heard about them is I asked my Swedish supplier, Sandy Zetterlund, if there were any more sheep I should include, and she sourced this fleece from her neighbors. With only 5 farms in Sweden that raise these sheep, you get to try a really special fiber. There are very few of them. Okay, I'm going to talk about one more type of sheep and their wool. Eider wool is actually not from an eider sheep. Nobody knows where the term came from, but they're actually German white-headed mutton. Now, in sheep language, mutton or mule sheep are just crossbreds, same as a mutt for dogs. This particular heritage is English, Leicester, and Cotswold would be Longwells. Hampshire, Oxford, and Texel would be meat breeds, and then their local marsh sheep, which would be really sturdy, hardy in bad weather. Careful breeders over time succeeded in retaining the desirable characteristics of the original marsh sheep, and by the mid-1900s, this new dual-purpose breed came to dominate the coast areas around the North Sea. In Germany, today, the breed, sometimes called dike sheep, are commonly grazed along the grassy areas of the North Sea dikes, where they fatten on the lush grass and at the same time help stabilize the dikes by trampling and compacting the ground as they graze. In winter, the sheep are moved behind the dikes and are often grazed on harvested cropland, mostly without the luxury of barns. So that's What's in the workbook? 131 different breeds and all their history and characteristics, pictures, fiber information, source of the information, my comments about each fleece and its source, pictures of the yarn, and test spinner comments and space for your own comments. So, thanks for listening, and thanks for joining me down this fiber rabbit hole that I made during the pandemic.